this compelling subject of reparations for native genocide and African slavery from those European nations, mainly Britain, France, and Holland, this compelling subject has brought us together. And these three nations perpetrated historic wrongs against humanity in the Caribbean during a period in excess of 200 years between the 17th and 19th centuries. The quest for reparations is not conceived as a strategic confrontation against these European nations, although it is for us in the Caribbean a defining issue in the 21st century for justice, reconciliation, and the righting of historic wrongs. The struggle for reparations in the Caribbean involves centrally a mature conversation with those European nations for an appropriate recompense to correct the legacies of underdevelopment occasioned by native genocide and African slavery. Note the formulation. For an appropriate recompense to correct the legacies of underdevelopment occasioned by native genocide and African slavery. And since CARICOM is making the claim, we have the former British territories that make the claim in relation to Britain, and Haiti in relation to France, and Suriname in relation to Holland. If this mature conversation does not yield a satisfactory result for the Caribbean nations, we intend to take the matter to the International Court of Justice for adjudication within the framework of international law. Crisscrossing this mature engagement is the necessary and desirable diplomatic, political, and educational endeavor in our region, our hemisphere, and globally. We are at an opportune moment for discourses on and possible resolution of the claim for reparations as part of the post-2015 development dialogues, and in the context of the United Nations Declaration of the Decade of People of African Descent. It is an appropriate and convenient juncture for the engagement on reparations between the Caribbean and Europe to be facilitated as an special carve-out in the post-2015 development dialogues touching and concerning the 17 Sustainable Development Goals adopted recently in September 2015 at the United Nations General Assembly. The case for reparations is unanswerably strong. It rests on moral and legal grounds. It is not concerned with the search for the direct descendants of those who suffered from native genocide and African slavery to be paid specific sums of money. It does not involve as a starting point a quantification claim in today's currency of the assessed value of every person subjected to native genocide or African slavery, and the assessment of the land stolen from the native population by Europeans. It is not about the representation in today's value of the 20 million pounds sterling paid by the British government to the slave owners in the 1834 to 1838 period in the Caribbean. Incidentally, that sum of 20 million pounds in today's value, multiplying by the objective factor of 839 amongst the 16.78 billion pounds sterling. If you think that I've taken 839, the factor, out of the thin air, I invite you to look at the studies done by Professor Draper and his group at the University College of London on this specific issue, the Slavery and Reparations Project. However, our quest for reparations is about repairing the legacies of underdevelopment which exist today and which are undeniably traced to native genocide and African slavery. I want that point to be understood with clarity. I repeat, it is not about searching for descendants of those individuals who are subjected to native genocide or African slavery and to pay them a specific sum of money. That is not what this is about. Because to do that, you're embarking on a near impossible task. It is not about having as a starting point for quantification the 20 million pounds which the slave owners were paid in the 1834-1838 period when the slaves were freed, and putting that in today's value, which would be 16.89 million pounds sterling. Those kinds of quantification are indicative of the numbers and more which would be required as recompense. What we are addressing is the real lived experiences today of the legacies of underdevelopment which can be traced directly to native genocide and African slavery. To this end, the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, has adopted a 10-point reparations agenda which covers the repairing of the awful material and psychological legacies of underdevelopment in a number of areas, including the economy, poverty reduction, education, health, housing, infrastructure, culture and memorials, the demand for a European apology for native genocide and African slavery, and the special matter of repatriation voluntarily to Africa of Rastafarians.
I have been a supporter and advocate for the principle and praxis of reparatory justice. And I have endeavored during my entire professional and political life to keep faith with this perspective in respect of Caribbean people, particularly those of African descent who have and continue to be in need of special acts of reparatory justice. I am here today to stand in solidarity with the work of the CARICOM Regional Commission and the vision of my former colleagues who have given vanguard support for its work. The Commission is still in its infancy, but it is already making its mark felt on the issues of reparatory justice before the region and the world. Progress has been made on many fronts. The very fact that you exist as a commission is tangible proof that civil society and the state have finally found a broad basis on which to build a common platform. And let me here say, in response to an observation made by Brother Commission, that in a matter of this sort, there can be no political divide, no separation between government and opposition, no separation between government and the church, no separation between all the elements which constitute civil society. We are all in this battle together. Many who have gone before, people like Marcus Mosiah Garvey, the late C.L.R. James, was written extensively on this matter. Our colleague, Ambassador Dudley Thompson, our brothers and sisters of the Rastafarian faith, and many more in the Caribbean have been calling for a very long time for a global discussion of reparations for the descendants of the enslaved Africans. There can be no doubt about it. Chattel slavery, slave trading, and the genocide of our indigenous people are all crimes against humanity. And no crime should go unpunished. Justice must be done. Since then, he has been invited to address the Congressional Black Caucus of the United States, and no doubt his engagement with Congressman John Conyers, the legendary soldier of reparatory justice for African Americans, and with Professor Ron Daniel of the Institute of the Black World, was fruitful and seminal. I am reliably informed that as a result of this engagement, the United States will in short time have a National Reparations Commission designed upon the CARICOM model. Where we lead, others must follow. It is the intention, I gather, of our American comrades to launch their national commission in New York within the context of a joint sitting with the CARICOM Commission. Marcus Mosiah Garvey had foreseen these developments.
We can boast our Nobel Prize winners from Guadeloupe, St. Lucia, and Trinidad and Tobago. We can hail our world-class writers from Guyana in the south to Jamaica in the north. We can celebrate our cultural artists, drawn from every corner, every nook, and every cranny. We can applaud our cricketers, our entrepreneurs, our bankers, our jurists, our priests. We can be proud of our leaders who have played important roles on the international stage. Leaders such as the Most Honorable P.J. Patterson, who is here with us today. And I'm quite sure that during the next 2 days, that we will gain from his wisdom and his experience. And sir, I want to thank you for coming and participating in this forum.
Another controversial topic was reparations. Stuart heads the Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Reparations, and he insisted that Barbados, like others in the Caribbean, is still hurting from slavery, and there should be no shame in efforts towards getting compensation.
I was just telling you about education. I was just telling you about health. You asked me about agriculture. All of these things have legacies. Our problems in all of these areas are legacies of the slave experience. Now, I know it is fashionable in Barbados, whenever you start to talk about slavery, for the purists to ask, but why are you going so far back? That was finished long ago. Now, the same people who ask that question go to church on Sundays and the priest talks about Adam and Eve, and they don't think he's going too far back. He talks about Hezekiah, they don't think he's going too far back. He talks about Daniel in the lion's den, that's not too far back. And I could go on. Ahab and Jezebel, not too far back. But if you talk about slavery just 150 years ago, you say you're going too far back. The stage has been reached where we have to settle this issue. Now let's be very frank about it. European nations, slave-owning nations, have been doing their best according to their lights to contribute to our developmental efforts in the Caribbean. We've enjoyed preferences on European markets. We have had, in our trading arrangements, for example, we've had 4 Lomé conventions, and we've had a Cotonou agreement, and now we're into an economic partnership agreement and so on. And we get aid out of the European Development Fund and so on. And we have got various forms of technical assistance and that kind of thing. So we're not here talking about a diplomacy of anger and protest. What we're saying is that upwards of 200 years after the abolition of the slave trade, and just under 200 years after the emancipation of slaves themselves, we are still chronically underdeveloped. We are still facing huge challenges. And we are still, in fact, we are now crushed by debt. We are now overwhelmed by deficit. We are facing educational challenges, health challenges, and in many respects, we're facing challenges of normlessness. We have sections of our societies that do not feel any effective part of the mainstream of the society. We are dealing here with a legacy. The average centenarian in Barbados today, that centenarian's grandmother or great-grandmother was a slave. So it's not too far away. And we're saying that this thing has left some scars, and we want to talk about it. This is not a diplomacy of protest. It's a diplomacy of engagement. And the CARICOM Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Reparations is taking the view that what we need to do is to engage those European nations most obviously involved in slavery and the slave trade as it affected the Caribbean, to see what agreements we can reach in terms of how they can enhance the effort they're making in our societies so that we can be rid of some of the asymmetries, some of the disequilibria, social and economic, that have been afflicting our societies since emancipation. We don't expect, because we're not that starry-eyed, that these nations are going to jump up and shout, mea culpa. They're not going to say, we plead guilty, what's the sentence? No, that's not going to happen. We expect that this is something we have to work through. We're not working through it in anger. We're working through it in a civilized way because we have good relations with these nations. Barbados' principal source market for tourism is the United Kingdom. We have a good diplomatic relationship with the Kingdom of Spain. We have excellent relations with the Netherlands. We have a good relationship with France, even though from time to time France labels us as a tax haven for offshore purposes, but we understand that. These are the little skirmishes that you have to endure in international relations.
Reporting from the 35th CARICOM Heads of Government Conference in St. John's, Antigua, I'm Dawn Paris for Barbados Today.
ideas do take some time to arrive at a state of maturation. As it is often said, ideas whose time have come. And this is an idea, reparations, repairing the legacy of the consequences of native genocide and slavery. It is an idea whose time has come. And it is now at the center stage of public policy in the region. As you are probably aware, there has been for several decades a discourse on reparations in the region and internationally. But the discourse has been taking place, certainly in the region, among intellectuals, civil society groupings, and also, very centrally, in the Rastafarian community since the 1930s. So that even though we have now had it at the center of public policy for the first time, the discussion has been ongoing. An important staging post in the evolution of discussion, discourse to public policy occurred in 2001, August, at the United Nations Conference to End Racism in South Africa, hosted by President Mbeki. And at that time, and we can speak about the conference if you wish sometime later in the interview, but that brought the issue to the fore. And we saw the negative responses from European governments, from the United States of America, and also from one or two African countries. But there was nevertheless a sufficient momentum on it that one saw that it is now getting into the structured councils of decision making. And then in 2002 or thereabouts, President Jean-Bertrand Aristide made his formal claim in France and to France and against France for reparations for African slavery in Haiti. Incidentally, you said in your introduction that there are two countries, Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago, which have just celebrated 50 years of independence. Of course, Haiti is 200 years. But I know you're speaking about the English-speaking Caribbean when you made that point. So that has been the backdrop. And we have now reached the stage by a gradual efflux of time where it is felt that we should have this discussion at center stage. And what I did first was to take it to the smaller regional grouping, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, in May, got the discussion in it going, got an approval to go forward. I went to CARICOM in July. I did a lot of preparatory work. In the meantime, Hilary Beckles had published his book, Britain's Black Debt, Reparations for Native Genocide and Slavery, which is the equivalent in the Caribbean for Randall Robinson's America's Black Debt. And the momentum simply built up. And with the new leaders in the region having a sense that the time has come, they said, yes, let us go forward. And the CARICOM Reparations Commission has been formed. The individual committees for reparations are been formed nationally. I hosted the first ever regional conference on reparations in the Caribbean. I have contacted a British firm which had worked with the Mau Mau group, the group of solicitors and lawyers in Britain, and they have provided some advice to the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and indeed through that advice indirectly to CARICOM, though they have not been formally engaged. And that's where we are with that issue at that juncture, to answer your question as to how it has evolved to this point.
My brothers and sisters, the Caribbean is not begging for handouts. The Caribbean is not begging for sympathy. The Caribbean is not begging for favors. The Caribbean is demanding reparative justice. Justice for the greatest crime against humanity in the entire history of the world. That is, the transatlantic trade in captive Africans. The Caribbean case for reparative justice is righteous. The struggle for reparative justice will be long, but every just cause is worth fighting for. And tonight, I join with you in praying that your efforts, our efforts, will one day succeed, and the enslavers will do what is right to the descendants of the enslaved. Thank you, and may God bless you all.